Hey everybody, it's Adam from the Army Painter back again with another video tutorial. Today we're going to take you a little bit behind the scenes and showcase how we help to develop some characters for a new product range we're calling Gamemaster. The third member of our adventuring crew is Dayrik. Fast and agile, Dayrik can at times seem like a blur in the wind. Extremely agile and acrobatic, he rarely fires an arrow from his longbow with both feet on the ground. In this final installment in our Wood Elf Ranger video series, we're going to be focusing in on some Masterclass techniques where we're going to be using some effects and maybe even some more refined highlights. So let's take a look at some of the paints that we're going to be using in today's video. Now that you've scurried back from finding all of the paints that you need, go ahead and grab yourself some clean rinsing water. I like to use my wet palette. You should give it a try too if you haven't yet. And your favorite brush, and let's get started. To start off, I'm going to my wet palette, and I have some rosy skin left over from the previous level up tutorial here, and a bit of fair skin, and I'm just going to mix these together on my palette. It's going to keep it nice and workable. And I like to have this 50-50 mix because when I'm applying the highlights, I will be doing a little bit of blending so we don't have such drastic sharp lines on the model, especially as we paint up these skin tones on our Elf Ranger. So go ahead and just mix these nice and smooth on your palette. Very simply, I'm going to go right to the model, and I'm focusing this highlight on the top half of the skin. And you can see why I like to use my wet palette. I have that sharp transition there. I can go back and just very simply blend it while the paint is still wet on the model. I'm going to go right to the face and pick out the details here, like the brow, the bridge of the nose, the tops of the cheeks, and the very tips of the ears. And I'm using pure fair skin for this, but again, I have that 50-50 mix on my palette if I would like to blend it in and make that transition a little bit more subtle. Now we're just going to move on to highlighting the hair. We previously painted this with Goblin skin, and now I'm using Utyug Brown to just add a very simple highlight. Now very carefully here, I am using a detail brush from the Army Painter Wargamer range, but use whatever brush you feel most comfortable with. And I'm just going to pull a highlight across the tops of these strands of hair to really give it that blonde effect. We want to give it a nice sandy blonde elven hair tone. Good example of that will be here on the back of the ponytails. You can see how I'm just adding a very simple and a very subtle line of paint to the tips of the hair. So for the next part of this tutorial, I'm going to be highlighting up all of the green cloth on the armor. So I have some of the Goblin green from the Army Painter War Paints range on my palette. And I also have some green flame and Grung green from the D&D Nolzur's Marvelous Pigments range. So with green flame, I'm just going to start by applying a small line. And what I'm trying to do here is just establish where I want my first highlight to be. I'm using thin down paint here just so I have nice control. And if you've been following along on all of these Gamemaster tutorials, you'll know that we've employed a lot of blending techniques like this simple wet blending. So I'm applying this first highlight of green flame, then I'm going to go back to our War Paints Goblin green, and I'm just going to blend those together ever so slightly to create a nice gradation on the model. Using thin down paints is a huge help when you're applying these fades or blends on the model, because it allows you to apply the paints in a more controlled manner, and it also gives you more working time with the paint on the model. So sometimes what I like to do is I just add a couple layers, just very thin, and I'll start my initial highlight with just a very rough highlight to really work in where I want those paints to be and where I want that highlight to be on the model. And then I'll just go back and apply a second smooth layer just to smooth it out, even it out. And you can see that we have a really nice blend already starting to take shape here. You could spend more time and really refine that highlight if you want to, or you could just go right to our Grung green. This is a unique color from the Nolzur's Marvelous Pigments range. And I'm just gonna apply a little bit here into the corners. And again, because we're wet blending this and we're blending this in, if you do go a little overboard, it's not a problem because we have those paints ready and workable on our palette. You can see I painted a little bit too much there to my liking, but I just go right at it with our green flame and soften that hard edge up a bit. It's almost like the reverse of an edge highlight. You apply an edge highlight after you're done doing all of the base coats and washing on a model. Here what we're doing is we're essentially applying the highlight and then working back to our base tone from there. Now this is going to be one of the trickier areas on the model to paint, and it's going to take quite a bit of time, so just take your time, be patient, and I'm going to apply that Grung green right into the top corners of all of these checkers. Then I'm going to take some green flame and I'm just going to work that highlight back in just like we did on the shirt of our Elf Ranger. Finally, take some of your Goblin green and you're going to work that back in just to make that highlight a little bit more subtle. I've gone all the way around the model and applied all of the highlights to the green cloak and the green shirt on the model. I'm going to move on to highlighting up the reddish brown areas. Now you're going to find these areas like here on the belt, and I'm using Cambion Crimson, this is a pure red color, to add my initial highlight. I just want to shift this brownish red tone of cobalt skin closer to red. Pull it away from the brown tones that we have on the other areas of the model. Now I'm applying this very thin, almost as if I'm applying a glaze to the pants here, and I'm just picking out the raised areas like the tip of the kneecap and just a little bit here on his inner thigh of his pant leg. You can see I'm not going crazy, just adding a little bit, just tinting the red tones on this brownish red color on the model. Now I'm going to shift to a slightly larger brush. This time I'm going to use a character brush from the Wargamer range for the cape because we do have a broader area. I'm thinning down these paints so that I don't have any streaks, and I'm just going to pull this red paint, this Cambion Crimson, towards the edges, blending it in to the cobalt skin, that darker brownish red tone that we had and used as our base coat. I'll let that dry a little bit, and then I'm going to come back and apply a second coat just to push the highlight and saturation of this red tone. I mixed a bit of Stirge tan in with that Cambion Crimson, and I'm just going to focus this on the bottom areas, the most extreme areas of the red leather. And this is going to give it slightly pinkish hue, but that's okay because we are kind of going for a reddish leather look. So just apply this 50-50 mix carefully, again, kind of like a glaze. We're just picking out those raised areas with very thin down paints. We don't want this to be too drastic. Areas like here on the cape, you're going to want to find the most extreme areas and carefully just pull that highlight down those extreme ridges. Then on here, the cape on the back, you're going to want to focus this at the bottom edges of the cape. Next, I'll add just a little bit more of the Stirge tan to the mix, and this is really going to push it to kind of a pinky hue, and I'm okay with that, again, because we are going for a reddish leather, and we want to separate this a bit from the other browns on the model. Now here on the belt, I'm just going to take a little bit of this mixture and apply it to the top. You can see it's very thin down paint. And then on these edges, very subtly, just pull that highlight. I'm going to leave some of that redder tone, that brighter red tone on the inside. Now with my detail brush, I've got pure Stirge tan, and I'm just going to find the most raised areas and the most extreme areas to highlight. I'm just going to add a very subtle highlight of Stirge tan. Now, if you feel like you've gone overboard a little bit too much with this highlight, don't worry, you can always go back to your wet palette and blend it back in using the colors that you previously used. That's one of the key advantages of using a wet palette. I'm going to apply an edge highlight here. So just using the edge of your brush, you're going to find the hard edge of the cape and just very carefully, let me get a little bit more paint on that brush, and just very carefully pull that highlight. Oop, just went a little bit overboard there, that's okay. Just got to find the right angle and let the brush do the work for you. It's been a really fun process developing these characters to help tell the Game Master story. It's seen a lot of hands and a lot of eyes at the Army Painter headquarters. We even hired famous illustrator and graphic designer John Gallagher to do the artwork for our Elf Ranger friend. And I couldn't be painting this model without his artwork, so let's take a listen to what John had to say about Dayrik.
You know, we can tell that Dayrik's an elf by the ears, of course, and by the grammar of ornament on the armor. It's normally a dead giveaway as well, because, you know, humans tend to be a little more utilitarian and less of a complete package, and dwarves tend to have, you know, very particular vectors to their design and so on. So you need to be able to read that from a distance. I think we succeeded pretty well with Dayrik, and of course the miniature was a great inspiration, giving a, you know, very clear idea what direction we wanted to go to. And in terms of what I'm hoping that Dayrik has the opportunity to accomplish throughout the campaign and throughout the, you know, the Gamemaster, the Gamemaster ecosystem, is like all of them. You know, when you're the first one, they kind of take a shot at them. You like to see how they evolve as they move along, and how they can become through other people's vision, other people's tradecraft, and they're applying their imagination on it. It's interesting to see, you know, how much of the character remains core, how much of it evolves forward and does more interesting things than from, you know, the humble beginnings that you first breathed life into them.
We're going to apply a very simple technique to all of the leather on the model as we did the cape and other bits. We've mixed a 50-50 mixture of Ruddy skin to Minotaur hide being our base tone. And we're just going to find the raised areas, and we're going to work in a very subtle highlight, and we're going to blend this into the model. I'm going to leave that little bit in the center of the boot there. I'm going to allow this right here to be the hard edge. And I'm going to pull that highlight, that blending highlight, away from that area. I'm using very thin down paint here, as always, especially when working on these highlights. Similarly, around the edge of the skirt, I'm going to apply this 50-50 highlight, ensuring that I leave this on the top. You can see here, I'm leaving the original Minotaur hide on the bottom half of that angle of the cape there. I'm going to apply it to this strap around his shoulder, and of course the shaft of the arrow. Now with the shaft of the arrow, I'm going to start, and I want it to be rather full at this side of the arrow, and I'm just going to feather this back. I'm going to use slower, lighter, and more distance brush strokes as I work my way back. I still have some of that fair skin on my palette, and I've mixed just a little bit of that into some Ruddy skin. I'm going to begin highlighting up this area here with this mixture. And the reason I did that as opposed to going straight to Ruddy skin is because when I get up into these areas where I haven't really quite reached a highlight, I want to take that Ruddy skin and I want to blend it back into that highlight. Just very simply. Sometimes we're taught as miniature painters that you have to paint in steps, that you have to apply coat A, coat B, highlight X, highlight Y, when a lot of times when you're working with a color, what you want to do is find the colors that you might need, and what you really are doing is working on sections. So I want to finish this section as much as possible before I move on to the next. So having those paints ready and available to me on my palette allows me the freedom and versatility to start going about and applying these highlights. And if I mess something up, or if I see something a little bit differently as I'm painting it, which you're often going to do, I can just work with it on the fly. So for the areas like here on the boots, you can see I pulled that highlight with the blend into this fold of the boot here, and this is where I'm going to apply that extreme highlight. I'm going to apply it to the folds here, and of course the top of the boot. Now you might be wondering why I split that highlight with that harsh line down the center of the boot. It's because there's kind of a crease there in the boot. So in order to visually make that stand out, I added that 50-50 split, and then when I add the highlight, it looks like a more severe, a more extreme crease. Just adds some nice visual excitement to the project. So we're going to go around the rest of the model. Of course, on the shaft of the arrow, I'm just going to apply one little highlight with this 50-50 mixture to either end, just like that, real simple. And you don't want to forget the strap that he's got around his shoulder and all of the rest of the leather bits on the model. Once we're finished with all of the leather bits, and don't forget the mask on our Wood Elf Ranger, we're going to move on to highlighting all of the areas that we previously highlighted in bone and orc skin, including the base, the feathers, and the wraps around the bow, the daggers, and the sword. So very simply here with Lawful White, we're just going to apply a simple highlight and add just a little bit of a feathering to the feathers of this arrow. So I'm just pulling a simple highlight like so. I've got some silver dragon on my palette, and I'm just going to use this to go ahead and pick out all of the silver metallic areas, like the diadem on our elf's forehead. I've got this little ring here at the bottom of the arrow, and then I'm just going to take the edge of my brush and just draw some simple edge highlights across the arrow there. You don't want to forget these little loops on his buckle there, and of course the buckle on his belt. Finally, with a bit of KI-Rin Gold, we're going to go about and highlight all of the gold on the armor, on the model, excuse me, all of the areas that we previously painted in Dwarven Bronze. Now I'm just going to apply this to the tips of all of the gold areas, like so. You might want to come back and add just a second quick coat over the top of those areas, just to ensure that you get a nice even coverage. And then I'm just going to apply this in a traditional highlight over top of all of the armor on his chest, like so. And of course these shoulder pads here, this is one that you're going to want to not forget because they are kind of tucked away on the model. Just apply a subtle highlight right in the center of those shoulder pads. On areas like here on the chest, you just want to be very careful that you don't paint over any of the details. Just very light brush strokes. Find those edges and pick them out.
Thank you all for tuning in to the third and final installment of our three-part How to Paint a Wood Elf Ranger series. It's been really exciting developing these products for our new Gamemaster product line. You'll have to stay tuned when we're able to reveal some more details about that soon. But until then, you can find all the paints and products that we used in today's tutorial at your friendly local game store from your favorite online providers such as Amazon or at www.thearmypainter.com. Remember that the magic in miniature painting is that it can be as simple or as challenging as you'd like it to be, but with the right techniques, you're sure to achieve some great results. Until next time, happy hobbying.